Minister, a basic underpinning of our society is the social contract, and the hope and the expectation that things will get better, that the lives that we leave to our children will be better than the ones that we have, and that the freedoms and the qualities of life that we enjoy are going to be expanded and improved upon. And how terrifying it must be to live in a time and in a state where that contract is broken, where there's an erosion of those liberties, and where you observe things going from bad to worse. I mean, it might be somewhat too grandiose, but you think of the fall of Rome, you think about 1930s Germany. I worry too when I look at the extraordinary temperatures that we're seeing in Canada and across Siberia. I have to say I do worry as well about my own children's futures in the context of a climate breakdown. And in the context of these EU statements, or post-EU statements, I look at the erosion of civil liberties in some of our EU counterpart countries. And so, Minister, I'd like to echo many of the previous contributions, and Deputy Howlands in particular, when we look at the unfolding situation in Hungary, and the need to call out Prime Minister Orbán for his unabated erosion of human rights and freedoms in his country. It's not a recent thing. This is the latest move by an Orbán-led government, but it builds on years of regressive policy and positioning. And while it's not hugely surprising, it is still deeply shocking to see this happen within a European context where we've come to take these liberties, I think, for granted. The direction of travel was quite clear and quite worrying from the outset. So in 2010, the party introduced a new legal framework which effectively weakened legal checks on its authority, interfered with media freedoms, and undermined human rights protection in the country. In 2013, that same government introduced provisions into its constitution that both enabled the criminalisation of homelessness and restrict the definition of the family. In 2017, the Hungarian government adopted legislation that forced NGOs to identify themselves as foreign funded if they received finances equivalent to €21,615 per year. And this was a move that was a direct attack on democratic process in which the NGOs play an invaluable role. In early 2020, when Europe first faced the COVID-19 pandemic, Orbán's government gave himself and his executive branch extraordinary powers to suspend certain laws and implement others by decree for as long as the emergency continues, completely sidestepping a parliamentary process. These examples are just a snapshot of a steady but hugely damaging impact on the Orbán government and the effect on the wider country. It was very welcome indeed to see the strong reaction of EU member states over the weekend, and particularly the intervention from the Dutch Prime Minister. However, after 10 years of democratic erosion by an EU member state, it's time to go beyond just a status quo response. Recommendations are important, but actions are what will lead to the necessary reversal and prevention of discriminatory moves by EU governments. At last December's European Council, EU leaders struck an agreement on the rule of law, which is an important step towards the protection of the rule of law and towards ensuring that EU funds are not wrongly spent by those who attack the rule of law and fundamental rights. In applying this new mechanism, the EU and its institutions have also a duty to protect the rights of final recipients and beneficiaries who are not responsible for rule of law violations. And we can fall into the trap of saying sometimes governments take actions that are in no way representative of the people. I would prefer to believe this to be the case here, but in a 2019 Eurobarometer poll, it found that 53% of Hungarians disagreed with the statement that there is nothing wrong in a sexual relationship between two persons of the same sex. And I don't think that we're immune to this same trend here, Minister, and the same trend towards populism. I think we have to be alive to it and aware of it. All across the European context and in our own patch. We have to defend against it. We have to defend an independent media. We have to very much encourage people to engage with that independent media, to make themselves well informed and to resource themselves adequately to be able to participate fully in the democracy that we're so lucky to live in. If this is indeed part of a bigger picture within the EU needs to face up to and address the disquiet among peoples of the member states, including what is causing the views to be shifted in a direction that undermines human rights. And I suppose to revert back to my opening, to have a look at that social contract, that we have seen this played out in Western democracies, not just in the EU, but across the Atlantic as well, where people's feelings of disenfranchisement have led to a situation that they have voted in particular directions that may not be to the best for our democratic institutions. We as a country, we've made significant progressive change over the last 30 or 40 years. We absolutely shouldn't take that for granted. But with that in mind, Ireland should very much work with EU counterparts in helping understand and address the origins of regressive policies. And seeing as I have a few unexpected minutes, I would pick up, I suppose, on the Syrian situation, which was in the initial speech laid out by the Minister. It's very, very worrying, the humanitarian situation that we see unfolding in the likes of Lebanon and Turkey. And indeed, we have to make sure that in this country we live up to our obligations and to our commitments. We have a long history. This is often referenced, but we know what it's like for large numbers of people to have to leave their home place, and how important it is that they get a reception and that they get opportunities in the countries that they depart to. And I would also pick up on that issue of international vaccination. I too support the calls for a TRIPS waiver. I don't think it's a silver bullet. I've been on the record of the Dáil as saying that. I think it's one part of the puzzle. I do think donations of excess vaccinations from the EU will play an increasingly important part, as well as donations. But I don't think there's another way around scaling up the type of production that we need to see in vaccination process. And it needs to be huge and it needs to be massive. And as Deputy Karen said, I would very much like to approach it from a moral standpoint. But there is absolutely a case to be made in terms of self-interest. And that in this case, nobody is safe until everybody is safe. And the best way to end the COVID pandemic, as it exists across the world, is to end it everywhere. And in order to do that in a timely fashion, and to prevent vaccine escape, which is what we're all, I think, very worried about, and we see elements of that in the Delta variant, as we know it, it does somewhat bypass the first dose of AstraZeneca, then we need to massively ramp up the vaccination program, not just in the developing world, in the developed world, but in the developing world as well. And I do think that there's a strong case to be made in that regard for the TRIPS waiver. If this was built into WHO rules, well then, if not now, when? And that's a question that I would leave with the Minister.
Thank you.